My wife, 41, and I, 46, were married for 18 years when our sex life ran out of steam. We had twins that were grown and attending college. When they moved out, I thought for sure our sex life was going to get a boost. It did for a month, but then having sex anywhere in the house at any time got boring. We read online that taking a friend vacation without your spouse is a good way to miss each other and crave intimacy. Friendly flirting can also help fuel the craving your partner has for you. I was skeptical of this, but it was the first time in a while I saw my wife so excited to do something. We started making arrangements for our separate vacations. For some reason, my wife and her friends decided to go to Colorado. On their tour schedule was the town where my wife grew up. As far as I knew, my wife didn't have a very positive childhood. I was surprised she wanted to go there and without me. I decided my friends and I would go to Wyoming. I always wanted to visit Yellowstone National Park. After the tickets were bought, my wife started texting on her phone a lot. I didn't want to bug her. I was pretty sure she was just making arrangements and chatting with girls about the upcoming vacation. I texted my friends about it, of course. We just didn't have as much to say. I asked my wife for a copy of their itinerary, and she was caught off guard by my request. She said she would have to edit it because she mixed up the dates on the first draft. Once she fixed it, she gave me one of the printouts. It was a bunch of girly activities like yoga, shopping, yogurt treats, hiking, and restaurants. Well, fast forward to 3 days into our 6-day vacation. I missed her a lot. I was having fun, but suddenly 6 days felt like way too long. To make matters worse, my wife stopped responding to me. It really made me worry. I told my friends about it, and they of course told me to just relax and enjoy my time away in a new place. I did, for another day. But my wife was responding really weirdly to my texts. It was like she didn't care what I had to say, and only responded because she had to. I felt terrible, and I was worried. My wife's itinerary placed her group at a restaurant that night for dinner exactly 6 hours away from my friends and I. I started driving there at 1 p.m., so I'd get there by 7. When I got there, I found all of my wife's friends. They were shocked to see me. I asked them where my wife was, and they told me the worst news ever. She left them to meet up with someone else. I collapsed onto one of the chairs by their table, and they offered me even more information. They said she'd been on her phone until this morning, when she left before anyone woke up. She only texted them to say she wouldn't be back until late. I asked if she said anything else about who she was meeting or where she was going. Finally, one of her friends gave me a tiny piece of paper. She said it was for safety reasons, because my wife didn't want to go somewhere without someone knowing. It was an address. This friend added that my wife didn't want her to tell anyone, especially not me, where she was going, and this was only if she didn't come back in time for the flight home. Seeing as I showed up unexpectedly and concerned, this friend was persuaded to tell me the truth. I thanked her and ran out to my car. She caught up to me and asked if she could tag along. I agreed. I needed someone else to balance out my panic. Her name was Jade, and she told me about her family, hobbies, and work. It was a great distraction, but as soon as we got to the address, I was worried again. It was someone's house. There weren't any cars in the driveway, but it was only 8 p.m. Just before 9 p.m., a car pulled into the driveway. A man got out of the driver's seat, and my wife got out of the passenger seat. I got out, followed by Jade, and called out, "Hey, honey." She jumped and turned to see me. Her mouth was hanging open, and she was infuriated. She immediately asked what I was doing there and why I was with Jade. I told her she came with me for emotional support because I wasn't sure what I was going to find. I looked at the man I had never seen before and asked who he was. He boldly said he was my wife's lifelong friend and new lover. I punched him in the face. My wife screamed and got closer to him. She yelled that he didn't know we were married. I asked her whose fault that was. He didn't know because she didn't want him to know. I asked if she planned for this the whole time, and she refused to answer me, even having the nerve to say I shouldn't be there. She looked at Jade and blamed her for being a snitch. I stepped in and said she only told me because she shared my concern, and I drove 6 hours to find her. This trip was supposed to renew our intimacy and give my wife a chance to miss me as she thought fondly of us, but instead, she used this time to meet up with a man from her past. I told her she wasn't welcome back at her home, and we were over. I trusted her to remain loyal and use this time to benefit our relationship, and she chose to destroy it. I couldn't believe it. After all this ranting, her bold lover started cursing at Jade and I, demanding we leave. He encouraged her to get in the house. She made eye contact with me for no more than 4 seconds before saying she was sorry and following him into the house. 4 seconds was all the deliberation it took for my wife to leave me standing in another man's yard. 4 seconds out of 18 years. I got back in the car with Jade and started driving back to the restaurant. She apologized for me having to go through all of this. She said she wanted to keep me company when I got home if that was okay, and I graciously accepted. After she got back to her car, I started the long car ride home. I called my twin sons and guy friends to tell them what was going on. They were extremely sympathetic and flocked to my side for emotional support. 3 weeks after I got home, Jade was visiting me at least twice a week. I appreciated her a lot, just as much as I appreciated my sons and friends because they continued checking up with me over the phone or in person. My sons told me they could never see Mom in the same light again. They kept in touch with her over the phone, but they dedicated themselves to their college studies and didn't consider changing their lives to help her in any way. One of my wife's mutual friends told Jade that her AP dumped her after 4 months for being too clingy. That had to hurt so bad. She was used to being married for 18 years. It's no wonder she was clingy to him. She probably wanted to be assured emotionally that she made the right decision, but that only made him leave her. I wondered what she was going to do with her life now, but I didn't try very hard to find out. An entire year later, I checked my old email address and found that my wife had been sending me emails weekly that entire time. The messages ranged from extremely angry with me to completely desperate for my response and love. I was honestly relieved I didn't find these messages until a year later, because by now I was romantically involved with Jade and wasn't tempted to take my wife back after her infidelity. I hope this story encourages people not to cheat. I hope it encourages people who are going through betrayal to know it's really okay. It's not the end of the world, and life goes on. Even though my wife's world turned upside down, she still had another chance to change her ways and make herself a better woman. Wow, OP. I am so sorry you had to endure the betrayal of your lifelong partner. You came out of your comfort zone for the chance to improve your marriage, and your wife made the selfish decision to meet with another man. I am sorry your wife didn't understand how beneficial and worthwhile it would have been to rekindle the flame in your long, successful marriage. She chose to sacrifice the father of her children, the man she spent 18 years with, for a fling that only lasted 4 months. Please, people, do not do what this woman did. She probably told AP her pity story about how her sex life was boring now and added that she was about to be in town for a few days. All AP heard was that he could have sex, probably more than once, with a woman he didn't have to commit to. Who knows what he promised her at the time, but it seems like as soon as she made the jump and switched men in her life, AP proved he wouldn't provide her the stability she was accustomed to. The lesson here is not to have sex with anyone who isn't your long-term companion. Sex is intended to be a sacred expression of love and commitment, but when it's had with the wrong people at the wrong time, it brings trouble. The best way to spice up your love life with a long-term spouse is communication. Sexy and out of the ordinary communication. You probably know what your spouse enjoys, so focus completely on that. Become a selfless fiend for what they crave and you'll surprise the both of you. If you aren't sure what to say, ask them about it or just let them know you're gonna try some new pillow talk. Thank you for sharing this story. Now let's get into today's second story. Today I'm going to tell you all about one crazy life-changing event that happened to me. It all started when I got a phone call halfway through my workday. My wife, 27, and I, 33, were married for 6 years at this point and she had been looking for a job for a year. She earned a small amount of money by making crafts and selling them on Etsy. I didn't want her to feel rushed or forced to get a job she hated. She'd already been through a really crappy childhood, so I only ever wanted to motivate her and make her feel safe. Our relationship seemed wonderful to me. She would get depressed sometimes and I knew it was because of painful memories of the past. I asked her what was on her mind at least once a day, but much of the time she didn't say anything. When she did, it wasn't anything I could help with or didn't already know. So on this particular day at work, I got a phone call from the police department of the next county over. I was confused but listened as he explained that he had no choice but to arrest my wife today. Understandably, I freaked out. I asked him what the hell happened and what was going on. He said they received several calls about a woman setting a car on fire in one of the residential neighborhoods. My first thought was that there was no way it was my wife, but he verified her name and phone number and said they had possession of her car. I was absolutely mind-effed. I asked if she gave any statement, the reason for being there, or an explanation, and he said so far she was unwilling to talk to them. I asked if she was allowed to call me and instead he asked me to come in person to talk to her. I agreed. When I got there, they had me sit in the interview room with her. Her expression went from hardened and angry to soft and defeated. She covered her face with her hands. I asked her what the heck happened. I needed to know because I could not figure this out. She whispered that she couldn't tell me. I asked why. She said it was because we were being recorded and I wouldn't want to know. I said she was wrong. I wanted to know and she was apparently caught red-handed, so the only thing left to do was explain herself. She sat up, revealing her reddened and depressed face. She said she was setting fire to her ex's car because he cheated on her. After I let this sink in a bit, I asked her how long ago this happened and why seek revenge now. She really didn't want to answer me anymore, but I was her husband. She was in a police station. Her options were limited. After breathing a lot and crying, she told me he cheated on her last night. I said what, and she went on to explain that she'd been seeing him for a few months while I was at work. I could not believe what I was hearing. The cops were gonna have a ball watching this drama unfold, so I clarified that she was seeing AP behind my back and when she found out he cheated on her last night, she decided to set his car on fire in broad daylight. After hearing my words, she looked like a shell of a woman. I told her I was ashamed to be her husband. She exposed her own affair by losing any self-control or responsibility she had left. I told her we were over and left the police station. I got a few sorry looks from some of the officers. My wife freaked out. She could only call people with permission from the cops, so the next person she called was her grandmother who raised her. Her grandmother actually thought it was a scam call and didn't look into it any further for another 3 weeks. Then she was finally contacted and paid my wife's bail. In order to afford it, she had to take out a loan. This was just the start of my wife's consequences. After she was out of jail, she tried to call me over and over again. After receiving 15 calls in one day, I finally answered it. She begged me to hear her out and at least meet her for coffee. She said it was the least I could do after the ordeal she'd been through in our 6-year relationship deserved one more chance of survival. I laughed a good hearty laugh. I told her our 6-year relationship was over dead in the past. I only kept that relationship with her in good faith that she would never go behind my back and sleep with another man. Not only did she do that, but she also jumped at criminal activity by setting his car on fire. She wailed and sobbed into the phone like it was her lifeline. I told her she made the decision to go behind my back and anyone should know it's only a matter of time before the truth comes out. I just got lucky because her idiotic actions did the work for me. I wished her luck in whatever she tries to do next with her life. As I said that, she started screaming for me not to hang up, but I did. Her aunt contacted me 4 months later. She asked if she could bring a truck over to get my ex's belongings. I said that was fine and she went on to explain that my ex's grandmother passed away and the house was in foreclosure. So my ex was moving in with her and I'd finally get her crappy belongings out of my house. That sounded fine to me. I did wonder how she was holding up, but I didn't ask. By this point, I started seeing another woman and did not want to give any false hope by asking questions. I hope my story encourages everyone not to cheat on their partner. There are 2 things that helped me get through this ordeal the most. The first was exercising daily. I didn't want to do it, but I forced myself to use my muscles until I could feel the burn. It helped me to get out built-up anger and turn my attitude around for the better. I wasn't feeling down on myself. I was feeling positive and capable. The second thing I did was show myself love and care by doing what I wanted. Most of the time it was listening to music and dancing. Other times it was reading, watching TEF, drawing, playing music, or going for a walk. OP, I am so sorry your wife went behind your back for months to sleep with another man. I'm sorry that you found out about her arrest for setting a car on fire. I can only imagine the shock you felt as her husband. This just goes to show that sometimes spouses cannot control or predict their partner's actions. You may think you know someone as well as you possibly can, but they could have so much pain and smothered emotion from their past that it comes out in a most unpredictable way. When this happens, please do not blame yourself. You can't possibly know or control what someone else is thinking or doing. Even more importantly, their disregard for you and the consequences they'll bring does not determine your self-worth. It simply means that they had pain and emotions they did not know how to handle or resolve. It means they made very poor decisions because of their pain and perception of things. As humans, we are all nothing more than a combination of several faculties working together, and when we let something that's ultimately meaningless affect how we behave and treat others, that's a mistake that will undoubtedly cause a ripple effect. I wish you the best of luck in life. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. My wife, 37, was a business partner with her father. They were both extremely wealthy because of this, which made me, 34, wealthy too. Since I married into her family, her father and I became very close, and he would show me a lot of business-related activities, so I understood them better. After 6 years of marriage, my wife started to distance herself from me. As part of her responsibilities, she would drive to clients' houses to deliver products to them and discuss upgrades. Obviously, being a well-spoken, friendly, and attractive woman helped business. My wife took this helping business notion a little too far one day. She started to seem particularly distant from me, and excited, in the weeks when she was scheduled to visit one particular client. I decided to confide in her dad about how I felt and what I noticed. He encouraged me to follow her discreetly to the client's house. I thought this was a sneaky answer from a normally straightforward guy, but I took his advice. I didn't know it was going to become the worst day of my life. I parked down the street from the house in question and watched her go in. The customer's name was Doug. According to our customer information, he wasn't married. Would that stop him from taking advantage of a married woman? Probably not. My mind was already picturing horrible scenarios, and it wasn't far off from what I was going to find. I walked up to the front door after 15 minutes. I thought about knocking, but decided not to, keeping in mind the word sneaky. I opened the front door slowly and peeked inside, but mostly listened. I could hear faint noises coming from the second floor. It didn't sound like any business conversation was taking place. I walked upstairs. My heart was racing, and I started recording on my phone. As I got closer to one particular door, I could hear them going at it. I opened the door and found my wife having sex with Doug. It was my worst nightmare coming true. My wife immediately turned to look at who was barging in on them, and started screaming when she saw it was me. She tried to shield her body from the camera, but it was too late. It saw everything. She screamed for me to stop recording and let her get clothes on. I continued recording as I left Doug's house and got in my car. It recorded my sobs and angry words as I drove to my father-in-law's because I didn't know where else to go. When I got there, my father-in-law acted like a real dad to me. He listened intently as I told him what happened. He watched the video, but only to the point where he could hear moaning. He believed everything I told him, and better yet, he said he was on my side. 20 minutes later, my wife arrived there too. She walked straight into the kitchen, finding us at the dining room table. Before she even sat down, her father asked her how long she'd been seeing Doug. I looked at him in surprise, just like she did, because I wasn't expecting him to ask that question. I thought for sure she couldn't have done this more than once. She tried to say it was only this one time, but her dad told her he looked at the travel logs. He knew she was going to Doug's house way more often than necessary for the past 11 months. My jaw dropped, and I looked at her expectantly. She didn't know what to say. She tried to speak and protect her image, but it didn't make sense. At one point, it sounded like she was defending her actions by claiming it would help business. Her father offered no sympathy when he told her she was fired. She let out a weird noise of shock and started stammering. She wanted to keep her job, but what could she possibly say? I had her on video sleeping with Doug, and it was clear this wasn't the only time she did it. Besides the betrayal she dealt me, her father told her this was not the behavior he expected from his business partner or daughter. The real whammy that made my wife plead forgiveness was when he announced that he was going to disown her. It didn't matter how much she apologized or what she said, her father's mind was made up. She couldn't live in our marital home, because her father's name was on it and he didn't want her there, and she couldn't live at his house either. She became homeless, living in her Audi. A nice car, but not a home. Once, when she called her dad crying, he told her she had 11 months, the duration of the affair, to stop and reconsider what she was doing. Because she didn't, he finds her despicable. He finished by saying I was lucky I found out the truth and got away from her. Her father gave me a choice. I could live in the marital home, and it would become mine, or I could move in with him. He owned a mansion that was about the size of 2 houses put together. The 2 halves were connected by one long hallway. I knew I would have privacy, but most of all, I considered him family and needed his emotional support. I decided I would continue to live in the marital home, but would still visit his place from time to time. He also offered me a partnership for the family business he runs, which I gladly accepted. I've been working with him for 7 years now since all this happened. Since then, I was also able to meet a new amazing woman who is now my wife. We have 2 kids together, and life couldn't be any better. As for my ex, her outlook on life isn't too great. I can tell because of her pessimistic posts on Facebook and the occasional bitter message she sends me. I just show them to my wife, and we have a good laugh about it. She may have some money still, but what she doesn't have is anyone around her that loves or cares for her as I did. Wow. Up. This is one crazy story. It sounds to me like your ex started to believe she had it all and wanted more. She probably started to think she deserved more attention, and that there was no better way or time to get it than with a client. Obviously, this proved to be a very stupid and selfish decision that would cost her the dearest relationships in her life and her career. You noticed right away when her behavior changed, and you asked your father-in-law for advice. I think you made lots of wise decisions through this nerve-wracking experience. She was left with nothing and no one to care for her. Let this be a lesson to keep your ego under control, and never assume for 1 second that sneaking around to achieve something is a good idea. I am so glad to hear that you have a new family and a close relationship with your adoptive father. Thank you for sharing your experience and positive outcome. I wish you the best of luck in life. Up. Now let's get into today's second story. My wife, 35, and I, 38, have 2 sons. At the time this story begins, Eddie is already 11 years old, and his younger brother Teddy is 7. One seemingly ordinary morning, my wife rushed off to work early. I prepared breakfast for my boys, and we had a fun, light-hearted morning chat, like we always do before school. The car ride to school was a quiet, and it seemed like Eddie had something on his mind. I tried asking him if anything was wrong, but he said no. I dropped them off as usual and went to work. After work, I picked them up from school at the request of my wife. She texted me, saying she had to stay at work late for a meeting. I hated when this happened, but was used to it by now. She stayed late at meetings at least 4 times each month for the past 10 years. When we got home, I started cooking dinner for my sons while they sat at the table and did homework. Eddie still seemed like he had something on his mind, but he did his homework and asked me questions about it. We ate dinner together, and they told me about their day at school. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, but this was the last time I would have a conversation and dinner with my sons before discovering life-changing news. We were about to clear the table when Eddie said he had something to tell me. His voice cracked, and he sounded like he was about to cry. Teddy looked uncomfortable and asked Eddie if he was sure he should tell me about it. I assured them they could tell me anything. Eddie proceeded to tell me that Mommy told them I wasn't their real dad, that a few times every month, Mom would take them to visit their real dad. My jaw dropped. I asked him who their real dad was and if I knew him. He said yes, I knew him. It was Uncle Kevin. I could not move for a few seconds. Both the boys asked if I was okay, if I was mad, and what I was going to do. When I snapped out of it, I told them both that I loved them. I told them that according to me, I would always be their dad. They were happy with that and helped me clean up dinner. They went off to play, and I contemplated what I was going to do. My own brother fathered my children. How could this have happened? I couldn't believe it, and I couldn't prove it. I told the boys to wait until a specific day to tell mommy that they told me I wasn't their daddy. They agreed and seemed to forget about it. I laid on the couch watching the boys play until my wife got home. As soon as she did, I told her I wasn't feeling well and had to go to sleep. I laid in bed awake until my wife put the boys to bed. When she got in bed with me, she tried to see if I was sleeping, and I pretended to be. When she was asleep, I unlocked her phone. My heart was racing because I never checked her phone before, and I kept thinking she was going to wake up. I found a messaging app tucked into the last page of an app folder called Utilities. It was like she didn't want anyone to find it on her phone. One of her messaging conversations was with Kevin. It was like reading an everyday conversation between a romantic couple, talking about their day, when they were going to meet next, how the boys were, and stuff like that. Mixed into that were messages like, I love you, I consider you to be my husband. The children are lucky to know their real father. I will marry you when the time is right. And then there were sexual messages. Apparently, whenever my wife and brother wanted to have sex, my wife would simply tell me that she had to work late. That was all the proof I needed. Right here, under my nose on her phone. I felt like the biggest idiot in the world for believing my wife and family were perfect and honorable. I took screenshots of their conversations and sent it to myself. Revenge had no choice but to be sweet. The next day, I hired a PI and a lawyer. I already had some proof, but it had to be undeniable. The lawyer informed me that I could receive alimony from my ex, keep my house, and sue my brother for sleeping with my wife and ruining our marriage. A DNA test was done, quickly, I might add, on the boys, and it was determined that the DNA was slightly off from mine. A more exact match was likely to be found in my brother's DNA. Over the next month, a PI followed my wife. It was hard for me to behave normally during this time, but it helped to pretend that my son never told me the secret. At the end of the month, the PI sent me all he captured. There were 42 pictures of my wife, children, and brother. They were all behaving like a family at the park, at his house, and out to dinner. It was the weirdest, most heartbreaking thing to see. There were also pictures of my wife and brother through his bedroom window. The PI must have climbed a tree, and that's what I call dedication. The pictures were explicit. Now that I had all the proof I needed, it was time for my son to tell his mom that I knew the truth. I reminded him to tell her and Uncle Kevin next time they had a visit. 4 days later, my wife left with the kids under the pretext that they were going to visit my wife's mom. I've always hated her, but only because she always hated me. She probably wouldn't ever accept that her daughter conceived children with her husband's brother and passed them off as his own. They were gone for 30 minutes before they returned home. It was just enough time for them to arrive at Kevin's, only for Eddie to tell them that I knew the truth and race back home. It was too late though. I already changed the locks and put a note on the front door. It read, "It's time for the 3 of you to move in with Kevin. Divorce papers and court summons will be arriving there for mommy and daddy." My wife banged on the door and cried. It bothered me that it upset her so much. She chose my brother over me by sleeping with him, having his children, and maintaining a secret relationship with him for a very long time. Not only that, but she coached the boys not to tell me anything about it. Even though she sat by the front door crying for an absurdly long time, I had no desire to go out there and discuss anything with her. Eventually, Kevin arrived to pick them all up. They lived with him through the divorce proceedings and court hearings. I kept my house and won alimony payments from my wife. I didn't have to pay child support, and I won in court against my brother. He was ordered to pay me a very large sum of money for sleeping with my wife and ruining our marriage. After I became a wealthy bachelor, my ex's relationship with Kevin fell apart. It must have been different living together with the boys 24/7. The stress of going to court and losing a lot of money probably didn't help anything either. After just 1 year, my ex moved out of Kevin's house and in her mom's house. Throughout that year, and even afterward, My ex would text me at least once a day asking how I was or telling me she was sorry. I still got to visit with the boys, and I know they appreciated it, but it was nothing compared to how we used to be together. My ex could see the difference, and she blamed herself for it, rightly so. It's been 2 years since all of this happened, and the boys show resentment towards their mother for changing who their dad is. She can hardly stand the guilt, but what choice does she have? She continues raising them at her mom's house and has yet to return to the dating scene. My brother doesn't speak to me, but I know he regrets what he's done because my dad told me so. I just started dating another woman, and I have a good feeling about her. She has 1 daughter and wants to have more children. She's compassionate, kind, and honest. I know that even if she doesn't become my wife, there is always hope for a bright future. Wow, OP, I am so sorry your wife did this to you. She knowingly went behind your back early on in marriage and had your brother's children. This isn't a story you hear every day, but unfortunately, it does happen. I'm glad to hear you have your dad to talk to, but for the most part, it seems you made smart decisions on your own. You took the time to figure out how to proceed. The things you set into motion helped you to make the cleanest break. It's lucky your wife didn't try to frame you for anything or plot to kill you. This actually happens in the world today. I'm so sorry about what happened to you and hope you are able to heal from this. My wife, 33, was an expert shopper. It helps that her grandmother and mother were very materialistic people while keeping a budget. She would hunt for the perfect sale, which is why I, 37, didn't usually jump up to go with her because she could be out for 6 hours or more. She would go out once a week, every Saturday, leaving the house by 6 a.m. She'd go to Saturday's market, then go to the mall, eat lunch, and probably shop more. We were married for 8 years, and the whole time she was in the habit of doing this. She took our 5-year-old daughter with her sometimes. My wife was a consistent light in my life, and I did not know she didn't deserve my trust. She started taking our daughter less and less often, leaving the house without waking her up or giving her the choice. I asked her why, and she said she could get back sooner without bringing her along because a lot of the time, she would start to complain and get tired long before my wife was ready to come back home. I suppose that was a reasonable explanation, but my daughter and I were both bummed because she enjoyed those trips with her mom. Our daughter actually started asking her each time if she could go with her, and she'd say no each time. She'd do something else with her the next day, or bring home something nice for her, but it wasn't the same. I let it go for a while, but eventually, I felt like I had to say something. I confronted her and told her she needed to take her with her that Saturday. She was not happy. I couldn't believe how inconvenient it was for her. She started to accept it and actually did follow through, but that Sunday, she went out alone. Usually, we all had family time and practiced meditation. Our girl always turned it into a game of peeking without getting caught. When the wife got back, she was really happy, like everything was fine. Then my daughter asked a question that led to the discovery of what was really going on. She asked her mom if she met the man with the puppet today. My wife forced a laugh and said no, he's only at the market on Saturdays. I asked who this was, and before my wife responded, our daughter said he was the man Manny kissed yesterday. I looked at her with wide eyes. She knew we had to talk. I excused myself to another room and waited for my wife to set up our daughter with toys before joining me. I quizzed her until she was blue in the face, but she couldn't convince me her lies were true. She tried telling me our daughter was talking about something else, but I knew her speaking capabilities were pretty accurate. She even looked at my wife like she was going to be in trouble with Daddy. She knew it was wrong, and she wanted me to know, so my wife eventually came clean. She said he was a nice guy that she got close to over the years she'd been going to the market. He liked her more than friends, and she didn't want to break his heart, so she started giving him kisses. I didn't think there was any way she could believe this was okay. I told her she betrayed my trust by doing this, even by being friends with this guy without telling me. I'd like to know who she's involved with, even if only for safety's sake. Now I was suddenly aware of a guy she'd gotten to know for years, introduced to her daughter, and kissed. I looked her straight in the eye and asked her if she ever slept with this man or anyone else. She blushed hard, looked away, and told me no. How much more obvious it could have been that she was lying to me. I stared at her, but she only tried asking if we could leave the room now, and I said no. I told her to tell me the truth because her whole body looked like she was lying. Her mouth got really dry, and she started to dry heave. She excused herself to her bathroom and threw up. I told her she needed to get it off her shoulders so she could feel better, but she pretended not to have anything to say. I told her I didn't want her to go to Saturday's market anymore, and she lost it. She said this was one of her greatest joys in life, and I told her that she spoiled it for herself because she started kissing an older guy. I wondered if she said older to try to get me to let it go like I'd picture an old lonely man. I wasn't a fool, so for a whole month, she didn't go anywhere over the weekend. Finally, she made an excuse to go out, but she took her daughter with her to help convince me she wasn't up to no good. They'd come home with groceries or other stuff that proved they weren't at Saturday's market. I hated that this had become an issue between us now. Every time she left, I wondered if she was seeing Mr. Kisser. On the first day, she didn't offer to take our daughter. I followed her. She didn't go to Saturday's market, but she did go to someone's house. Before I got confirmation, I knew this was AP's house. I could feel it in my bones. It was like my wife's energy and emotion were contagious to me. I knocked on his front door after my wife went inside. AP answered it, and I asked him why I saw my wife just come inside. My heart was pounding out of my chest as I pictured this guy meeting my daughter. He looked young and confused, but before he could ask me anything, I asked if he was the puppet guy at Saturday's market. He covered his mouth for a second and asked me if I was her husband. I said yes and yelled my wife's name. She came out, and he told her to leave. Then he told me she introduced herself as a widower. I felt like my heart stopped beating permanently, and I was only surviving off air and my still blood. My wife came rushing out like she had a right to be mad, rushing past me. I followed her. She frantically tried to get in her car, but I grabbed her keys from her and ran to my car, locking the doors. She watched helplessly as I took her house key off before giving them back. She told her parents I kicked her out for no reason, so they let her stay with them and arranged to have a truck come get her stuff. They came over to visit with our daughter and asked me what really happened. I told them the truth, and they must have made my wife's life at their house a living hell because every day she told me she hated me for telling them what happened. She moved out in just 5 weeks, opting to take turns sleeping on different friends' couches rather than stay under their roof. The divorce went in my favor, and my wife is at least partially involved with our daughter. OP, it sounds like you came out on top of this experience, taking what you could learn from it and tossing the rest. Don't look back, and like you said, find the happiness and hope in every day you have to be alive and make choices. Choose to eat healthy, spend time with yourself, loved ones, work out to keep your body fit, and do what you love. Work on those habits you haven't thought of as sabotaging your life's progress. Expect nothing, and accept everything you get in life with a grateful heart. Her kissing him like it was okay shows she did not have the maturity or level of thinking required to have a long-lasting, sacred relationship. It's much worse that she introduced her daughter to this outsider and herself as a widower. I wish you the best of luck moving forward. Now let's get into our second story for today. I, 34 male, was dating my fiancée, 32, for 3 years before I proposed. She grew up in a very sheltered household, so I was the first man she dated and slept with. We grew up in the country away from it all, so we felt old-fashioned compared to how a lot of people live their lives, but that's how we liked it. Our families were proud, and there wasn't any drama. After she said yes, we started looking for a house to buy. It figures that the first house we look at is being shown by an extremely attractive man, and I say that as heterosexually as possible. I wasn't worried at first. I thought my wife to be loved and respected me, but when I saw the way she looked at this stranger, it was like she saw all the future possibilities if she married him instead. She asked him lots of questions about his personal life and seemed completely intrigued that life brought them together. I felt left in the dust. This couldn't have been all in my head. She wasn't just being friendly. When we left the house tour, I asked her what that was all about, and she played dumb. She acted like I didn't just see her flirting with this guy, like her life depended on it. I told her what I saw, and she said I must be an extremely jealous person to have seen something that wasn't happening. Well, I told her we weren't buying that house because I didn't like that guy, and I wasn't comfortable with her seeing him ever again. Since that day, she started asking me more questions about her appearance and what my goals were in life. I think she started wondering if I was good enough to be with her. She started talking about how great it would be to make as much money as a realtor and to be able to be dressed up and just show houses seemed so easy. I told her I didn't want her to work at the same realty place as that guy. Little did I know, she was already texting him and applied to the company. 2 weeks later, she told me she was hired as a bank teller. She started going to work each day, and I didn't even go to the bank she was supposedly working at until a week after she started. I later on figured out that she wasn't there. I called her to see where she was, and she answered in a cheery voice, but when I told her I was looking for her at the bank, she panicked. She started stuttering and saying she was out to lunch, but I told her not to lie to me. I said I already went inside, and no one knew who she was. She was speechless. She finally said I had to promise not to be mad, and she told me she actually became a realtor. Of course, she was working at the realty place. I told her not to. Then, before I even admitted how mad I was, she told me we were invited to AP's house for dinner, the man that showed us the first house. I felt like I was losing my fiancé, and there was nothing I could do but play along. She swore they were only friends, and I didn't have any concrete proof otherwise. I wouldn't be able to divorce her without knowing I wasn't jumping to conclusions, so we went to his house. It was a mansion, and it made me sick. There was another couple invited over, so at least it wasn't just the three of us, but he mostly spoke to my wife all night long. When I couldn't hold it anymore, I went to the bathroom, and when I came back out, they were gone. I asked the other couple where they went, and they said outside, but they didn't look certain. I went outside and started speed walking around the house to find them, but I couldn't. I started yelling like a crazy person, and felt like my woman shouldn't have put me in this situation. When I went back inside, I must have looked panicked. I think the girl felt bad for me because she said she saw them go upstairs. I took 3 steps at a time, and found that only one bedroom door was locked. I banged on it, demanding to see my fiancé, and it was about 30 seconds until he opened the door. All he said was he was sorry old habits die hard when it comes to locking the door, but a few things crumbled his lie to pieces. First off, he had my fiancé's shade of lipstick on his lips. Her face was bright red, and she was trying to casually stand and hold her wine glass like she wasn't just caught in the act. AP called for the other couple as if he was upset with them for failing to guard the stairs like he asked, but it turned out they left. I walked into the inn, sniffed around, even smelling my fiancé's neck. She held her breath, said I was being weird, and asked me if we could go back downstairs now. I ignored her and continued looking for clues. She stammered and said he was just showing her the space in his walk-in closets. I looked into her shameful eyes, and asked how she had the nerve to lie to me, disobey me, and sleep with the guy I wanted her to avoid. At that moment, I knew she wasn't worth my commitment, as if all the things leading up to this weren't fishy enough. I told her she wasn't the hot stuff she thought she was, and she deserved to live a meaningless life without the sacred relationship between a man and a woman that I tried to have with her. AP was super quiet and awkward. He looked completely different from the confident selling man my fiancé was so infatuated with. I got in his terrified face and yelled that I should beat him to a pulp for taking my woman from me. He was so scared of that happening that he already called the police to request an officer's presence. I left before they got there. AP didn't realize that by doing that, he provided me with a police report I obtained a copy of, where they each admitted they were having an affair, and I caught them. I was able to use this to publicly shame them. They became the faces of sleazy salespersons you didn't want to trust around your own spouse. They lost their jobs and family support while I dodged a lifelong mistake. It still freaks me out that she started an affair with the first attractive man she came in contact with as an engaged woman. OP, I am so glad you didn't marry this girl. She was obviously not ready to commit to you for the rest of her life. It seems to me she never had to face temptation before this. When she realized just how big the world was, her ego grew with it, while her morals all but disappeared. If she really was having an identity crisis, or didn't think she was ready to be married, or even thought she needed time to explore the world on her own, she should have communicated her feelings to you. No matter how hard it is for someone to have that talk with another person, it's necessary. It's a part of growth, learning responsibility, and empathy for others. You would hate to be cheated on more than dumped, so do the hard thing and have the talk. You might be surprised what someone is willing to do to work on themselves or make things better. Thank you for sharing your story. I wish you all the best. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Around the time my wife cheated, we had been married for around 15 years. We met in college, got married, and started having kids a few years later. I never thought anything was wrong, which I am sure some people rolled their eyes at, but I mean it. Things seemed fine. We'd get up in the morning together, have breakfast with the family, and then go about our day until coming home in the evening. Then we'd have dinner and spend some time together as a family. Our intimacy hadn't changed at all. Sure, it was nowhere near the level when we first got married, but it still was pretty good for a couple who had been married as long as we had. I think if my wife had shown some signs, it would have been a lot easier to digest, but she didn't. Even after all these years, I still can't see any signs. Maybe she had put up a mask for me that was so good I was unable to see through it. The only reason I even realized something was going on was because of my kids. They happened to see mommy kissing her friend while I was at work one day. All of the kids were under the age of 10, so it was really difficult for them to see it. When I got home, they innocently asked me what was going on. I can't tell you how hard it was to keep up a facade for my kids, but I did. My response was to smile at them and tell them I'd talk with their mother. That night I did just that. My wife was taken aback. She said the kids were mistaken and she was just giving her friend from work a hug. He had dropped something off for her, is what she claimed. It's crazy how genuine my wife sounded. I almost wanted to believe her, but I knew my kids wouldn't make something like that up. Plus, it wasn't easy to confuse a kiss with a hug. However, I let my wife think that I believed her and decided to go to old school. I hired a PI to find her. We had the money, so I figured it was a good way to make use of it to get proof. Within 2 weeks, I had my evidence and presented it to my wife. She didn't have much to say then. All she did was cry and cry, going on about how the coworker she was seeing was her soulmate. It wasn't planned, of course, and just happened. At that moment, I knew my marriage was over. There was just no way I could stay in a marriage with a woman who cheated on me, called my kids liars, and tried to make it out as if they were the bad ones. If I hadn't hired a PI, she probably never would have even told me the truth. I had to start the divorce process. She did beg me to stay, but eventually slinked off to go be with her AP. We had an amicable divorce and custody agreement. It was split custody, but the older the kids got the less they wanted to go over. They understood what their mother did once they were old enough. Never did I say anything to them about it or talk bad about their mother, because in the end she was their mother, after all. When they did get older, I tried my best to answer the questions to the best of my ability. It got to the point where my kids didn't even want to spend time with their mother anymore. She did take me to court, but by this point, they were of age where they could choose if they wanted to go over or not. They didn't, so the judge said it was out of her hands. If my kids wanted to stay with me full time and not visit their mother, then so be it. My ex was not happy with this and blasted me over social media as one does, but I ignored it because it was beneath me to pay any attention to it. By this point, my ex had remarried to her AP and had a kid with him. This was probably another reason why our kids didn't want to go over there anymore. It felt to them that they were being replaced. At least, this was what I suspected to be the case. Up until our kids turned 18, my ex tried her best to get them to come see her, but it was to no avail. Once they went away to college, she couldn't use any more legal means to try to force them to see her, even though it didn't work anyway because the judge wouldn't force it. The years passed. My kids graduated college, got married, and had kids of their own. I was thrilled to become a grandfather for the first time. It truly is different from being a parent and gives you a great opportunity to spoil them rotten. At some point, my wife stopped trying to get into contact with our kids but started up again after her husband died. She only had one kid now with the deceased husband, but they weren't planning on having kids anytime soon. Her only chance at having grandkids was to be around the ones we shared. However, our kids still wanted nothing to do with her. I don't know if my ex-wife wanted to brag about it on social media or wanted a relationship with her grandkids because she genuinely wanted it. Whatever the reason, my kids didn't want to spend time with her or have her see their children. This was their right. She kept trying, even going so far as to constantly message them on social media and try to see if they would rekindle a relationship with her. If she had left things well enough alone and at least apologized, which she never did, I might add, to them, then it might have worked in her favor, but my ex was never great at thinking that far ahead. So she's missed out on a lot of special moments with her grandkids. I remarried myself a few years ago, and my second wife has become more of a grandmother to my grandkids than their biological grandmother ever has been. They barely even know of her existence. She's now quite lonely because after news of her affair came out, my ex lost a lot of her friends and even some of her family members. They turned against her because they didn't like what my ex had done to me. We never had any issues with each other and still reached out to me now and then. I wasn't as close to them as I once was, but we continued to talk to each other a few times a year. While I have a rich family life, my ex is now a bitter and lonely widow. From what I have heard, even her child with her deceased husband isn't very close to her. They have distanced themselves from my ex for some reason. I didn't care to know why, but I could come up with a few reasons why they would do that. Had my wife not stepped outside our marriage, she wouldn't be facing her golden years alone and with no kids or grandkids to share it with. I didn't have an ounce of pity for her because she made her bed and she was going to have to continue to lay in it until she took her last breath. OP. When you hear about cheating spouses, you rarely get a glimpse into how it can have an impact on their life even decades later. This is a perfect example of this. Your wife truly did have it all. A great spouse, kids, family, and friends. She threw it all away because she believed she had found her soulmate. There were so many other ways she could have done it, but instead, she chose to take the easy way out and cheat on you. Amazingly, she was willing to go so far as to blame the kids and brand them as liars. Based on this alone, it's no wonder that your kids want nothing more to do with your ex. The same goes for allowing their children to be around her as well. She could try to make amends in some way, but it seems like your ex just kept digging your heels in. Continue to enjoy your life with your new wife, kids, and grandkids. Let your ex continue to be a bitter, angry person. Now let's get into our next story for today. I, 35 male, was married to my ex-wife, 35, for 10 years. The two of us got married straight out of high school. People warned us against it, telling us it was way too soon and we should just wait. Finish college first, start a career, and then see where we were at was what they wanted us to do. Me being a fool in love meant that I didn't care what any of them had to say. We had been dating since sophomore year of high school, so I thought I knew everything and found my forever person. My wife at the time seemed to be on the same page. So we got married and went to the same college. The two of us lived in married coupled housing, which was helpful for us. Even though we were busy with college, I felt that our marriage was at its strongest in college. After we graduated, we got our apartment and jobs in our chosen fields. Things from there still seemed great. Slowly, we were building our future. The people who had been against us in the beginning and warned us against marriage were wrong. They had since come to support us. Her family was like my second family, so after marrying her, I did gain a lot more family members. It was about a year and a half before our 10th anniversary. I noticed something was going on with my wife. She was more distant and didn't want me to ever touch her. I attributed it to me working a lot lately and just being very busy. I decided to make it up to her by planning a romantic night. She ended up not coming home that night and used the excuse that she was staying with a friend. Like I said, I had no reason not to believe or trust her, so I assumed she was telling the truth. The closer we got to our 10th anniversary, the more it continued. My wife was even more indifferent to me than ever and was hardly home. It was at this point, I realized the chances of her having an affair was high, so I used one of those Apple AirTags. I was ashamed to use it, but I had to find out. Instead of going to a friend's house like she said, she was across town in the opposite direction. I drove there and waited for her to come out. She did come out arm in arm with some heavily tattooed and pierced guy. Compared to my straight-laced self who always played by the rules, it was quite a shock. I took a video and quietly drove home. When she got home, I didn't say anything and just played the video for her. After the shock wore off, she started yelling at me for planting an AirTag in her car and following her. It was creepy, apparently. The logic she was spewing was just very hard to follow. I just waited until she quieted and asked why. My wife claimed she needed someone more exciting and not as boring as I was. Working hard to provide a good life for us wasn't what she wanted. I pointed out that by working so much, I was able to help us afford a nice house, car, etc. But my wife just told me she wanted more. If what she wanted was something more, then I was fine with that. True to her word, my wife wanted out as quickly as possible. With me being the breadwinner, she could have gotten a lot of money and spousal support out of me. However, she seemed more focused on the ink being dry on the divorce papers than anything else. She wanted so badly to be with her precious AP, who was her true soulmate. I was just a stop along the way to finding him, her words, and not mine. If that's what she wanted, then fine. The agreement ended up with me getting the house, dog, and more than half the money in the joint account. I was shocked that all she wanted was the car to be paid off completely and no alimony. I guess my ex wanted a complete break from me, which was why she agreed to such a clean split. Did it hurt? Yeah, of course it did, but if that was how she wanted it then, so be it. It was probably better for me as well to get a clean break. From the day our divorce was final, I had no contact with her because I saw no reason why I should continue to have her in my life. However, we did have mutual friends and I still kept in contact with some of her family members, so I was still private to certain things that were going on in her life. The AP, or the new love of her life, was gone within a year of the divorce. He dumped her for someone else, which sent her into a tailspin. Since she had been staying at his place, it left her with no place to go. My ex couldn't go back to her parents because they had disowned her pretty much and still talk to me to this day. Last I heard, my ex-wife had been living in a small apartment with her sister and the new love of her life. She's working 2 jobs to make ends meet and is in debt. Had she pushed for more during our divorce, then she would have had more money as well as a lemony to fall back on. I mean, I wasn't complaining, but if she had been thinking with her head instead of her heart, she would have been better off. To make it weirder, her new boyfriend has the same name as me. I'm not sure how to feel about that, so I choose not to think of it very often, or at all. It just seems a little taboo to date someone with the same name as your ex. Like you wouldn't date someone that had the same or similar name of a family member, so why one with the same name as your ex-husband? It just didn't make sense to me, but when it came to my ex, there were a lot of things I didn't understand and would probably never understand either. She was my past anyway, so I didn't need to worry myself sick when it came to my ex-wife. It's been a few years since our divorce, and while my ex-wife's life has been a downward spiral, mine has been great. I got remarried about 3 years ago, and the 2 of us are currently having our first child. Trusting another woman was difficult for me, so it took me a while to even think about dating again. My now wife was very patient, however, and was willing to wait for me as long as she needed. Eventually, I felt ready to date again, and it led to a second marriage. I have even reached a new level of success. My wife and I managed to sell the old house I had with my ex, buy a bigger one, and even have savings to spare. Both of us had lucrative careers, though my wife planned to go on maternity leave once the baby was born. If my ex knew about my new life, then she has yet to reach out to me. I doubt she ever will, which suits me fine. There is no need for her to ever speak again, but sometimes I do wonder if she regrets having an affair and hurrying through a divorce so she could be with her AP. Chances are my ex regrets it, but what comes around goes around. For my ex, truer words had never been spoken. OP. I love the saying you use at the end of your post because it is so true. What comes around will go around. It might seem like the person who hurt you has it all and will never face consequences for their actions, but they will one day. It might be a subtle consequence, or in the case of your ex-wife, the consequences are big and have a lasting impact on their financial future. It's so great that she didn't try to push you for a lemony or strap you for cash after your divorce. I have heard that this happens to a lot of divorced men, so I'm glad she was naive about it for your financial sake. Congratulations to you and your new wife, as well as your unborn baby. This gives others hope that there are other fish in the sea and happiness can be found again. It's not very easy, but it is possible. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. Hi everyone. For anonymity, I'll be using fake names for this post. My wife Kara, 29, female, and I were married for 3 years, and we were 2 love peas in a pod. When Kara and I first met, I didn't think I would spend my life with another woman apart from her. I had this certainty about her, and from first sight, I knew she was the one for me. Also, the increase in my heartbeat confirmed that as I approached her to speak to her, the first time I saw Kara was at a distant friend's birthday, which I was dragged to attend by another friend. She was sitting with a group of friends, and they were all chatting loudly and drinking. It was a late-night party, and there was so much to drink, but I didn't drink more than a glass, because I wanted to be in the right state of mind for work the following day. The thing is, I used to be a timid person, and approaching ladies, gorgeous ladies like Kara, was a big deal for me. My friend, who dragged me to the party, noticed that I could not take my eyes off her since we arrived there, and without asking if I wanted to, he ordered the waiter to send her an expensive bottle of champagne and tell her it was from me. After it was delivered, I noticed that all her friends at her table turned in my direction, and they all smiled simultaneously. Then she smiled, raised her glass, and mouthed, "Thank you." Almost immediately, my friend pulled me from the chair I sat on and asked me to go and say hi to her. He knew I had been single for more than 4 years, and he wanted me to maximize my once-in-a-blue-moon pull of attraction, I felt. He knew I wouldn't like the idea, but he kept insisting, and after persuading and trying to convince me for nearly 15 minutes, I summoned the courage, walked to her table, and asked if we could talk privately. Her friends excused her, and we sat at a different table. We didn't say a lot that night because I was stunned by her beauty, and to be honest, it had been years since I talked to a woman about something that wasn't work-related. I worked as a programmer at a prominent tech firm in our city, and considered anything other than work a waste of my time. We introduced ourselves to each other, and I found out she was currently doing her pay-to-D, even without saying so much. I'm sure my constant blushes and ear-to-ear grin had given me out that night. When we delved into her work life, I discovered she worked part-time as a junior writer/editor at a publishing company, and I believed her because she sounded intelligent, and there was something about the way she spoke. After our little chit-chat that night, we exchanged contacts, and I left the party because I had to rest for a few hours before going to work the following morning. We had our first official date about a week later because I was caught in the web of deadlines, and she claimed she was busy too. Our first date was more fun than the night we met. We talked about so many things, and I loved that she was very free-spirited. She smiled and laughed wholeheartedly, and it was evident that she enjoyed our conversation and our time together. After our first date, we hung out more often and visited each other's apartments. Before we started dating, she would come over to my place on weekends, and we would try cooking a meal together from a cookbook, baking pastries with strange names, or we would just do something fun. As weeks passed, we got closer to each other, and I could not go to bed without thinking about her every night. I saw all the signs that convinced me she was the one for me, and I kept imagining what it would feel like to spend the rest of my life with Kara. As friends, I took her shopping and got her flowers and the things I knew she loved. I knew she loved me too, and I also knew she wanted me to ask her out. Her body language said it all, and eventually I did, and she said yes. For me, money was not a problem. I was well paid, and most importantly, I loved a spoiled Kara because it made me happy. We ended up dating for only 13 months, and we got married. We had a beachside wedding. Kara wanted that since childhood, and I was happy to do that. The wedding was small because we wanted to use part of the money for our vacation, and we did that. The first 2 years of our marriage were heaven on earth. Kara and I were much more in love with each other than when we were dating. Our bond grew stronger, and we literally did everything together. In fact, I only had breakfast, lunch, or dinner if I had it with Kara. We would eat together in the morning before she left for work. Lunch would be at a restaurant close to her office, and we always had dinner together when she returned home. Even when she had to spend extra time in the office, I always waited for her to come home so we could eat together. Aside from eating together, we had the rule of going to bed early so we could bond, get intimate, and talk about random things before sleeping off. Already in our first year of marriage, I had been promoted to a senior programmer in the firm I worked for, and my work became 100% remote unless I chose to go to the office. Kara was also done with her PhD, and now working full-time as a writer/editor in her publishing company, which also came with an increased workload. Unfortunately, a year after Kara started working as a full-time editor for the publishing company, she got laid off. The company was cutting down on staff, and Kara also had to go. This was in the third year of our marriage, which changed many things between us. Being sacked took its mental toll on her, and she slowly became depressed. We no longer talked like we used to or did our usual weekend cooking tradition. She became a shadow of herself, and it hurt me to see her that way. I even offered to double what she was paid at the publishing company, hoping it would brighten up her mood or cheer her up, but it didn't. She told me she wasn't working there because of the money, but because it was always her dream to work as an editor in that particular organization. Despite shuffling our house and her parents' house, Kara was still not herself, and I was becoming more concerned. It wasn't until a friend of mine recommended that she talk to a therapist, and that was when we began to see changes. Slowly, she became more active and the vibrant, cheerful woman I used to know. She met with her therapist 3 times a week, and I even insisted that she made it 4 times a week because I was impressed with the results I saw. I wanted her to be fully back to how she used to be, so bad that I didn't notice something else happening between her and the therapist. I was cleaning the house to surprise her the day I found out. She had gone to her parents' house the previous day, and I didn't want her to come home and clean. I even went grocery shopping to make her favorite meal and got scented candles to make her dinner special. I cooked first so I could clean up at once. I was in our room cleaning and folding clothes in the wardrobe when my hands touched a small journal that was partly tucked under a pile of clothes. I pulled the journal and realized it was from her therapist because it had the company's insignia on it. I know I should not have read it, but I was curious about what she had been journaling. To my greatest surprise, I found out Kara and her therapist were having an affair, and she journaled every bit of it. I was speechless and heartbroken. I went through the journal again to be sure of what I had read, and the content didn't change. Kara was cheating on me, and she was unapologetic about it. She even wrote about how her therapist was better in bed than me. I've got to admit, I was hurt and cried like a baby that day, and everything I planned for us was ruined. I laid on our bed for hours, and when it dawned on me that what had been done, I wanted them to pay for hurting me. I took pictures of the journal and filed a complaint to the therapist's office. I even took the journal with me in case they had doubts, and they were disappointed when they read it. When Kara came home that day, I told her I dropped by the therapist's office, and she was surprised. When she asked why I did, I dropped the journal on the table, and she began to cry. Immediately she started begging me, but there was no way I would listen. Reading her journal broke my heart, and I could not forget all I had read. I kicked her out of the house and threw her stuff on the porch. She was so embarrassed and could not move, so I called her parents and asked them to come and get her off my property. In addition, I mailed the photocopy pages of the journal to Kara's grandmother, who was very fond of me, and she was taken out of her grandmother's will. Her parents begged me to not tell her grandmother, but that was my ultimate revenge plan. Ultimately, we got divorced, and her therapist had his license revoked. It was good that we didn't have kids yet, so it was easier for me to move on with my life. Kara became depressed and more miserable after we divorced, and I am glad she had to live with her parents' disappointment and shame. She called the house several times to beg me to take her back, but I wanted nothing to do with her. The last time Kara came, she met another woman and attacked her. I was so mad that I called the cops on her, and after that, I filed for a restraining order, and that was the last time I saw her. As for the woman she saw, we broke up because I was still hurting, and I have not completely moved on, but I'm glad I'm making progress. OP, you handled the situation maturely and gave her a taste of her own medicine. Despite being a good husband and trying to support your wife, she still chose to cheat on you with her therapist. I know the things you read in a journal must have broken your heart, but you should understand that humans are full of disappointment, no matter how close we are to them. It's sad things ended that way, but you should be glad it did. She probably hates you for ruining her life and taking her out of the grandmother's will, but revenge is best served cold. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Now let's move on to the second story of the day. The first time my wife and I met was at a small restaurant near my workplace. That day, I went to have lunch with one of my colleagues, and I could not ignore her sitting alone. I was used to approaching girls and sweeping them off their feet with my sweet lines, and I thought I would get lucky with my wife. But she completed the line I wanted to use on her before I did. I was impressed to see that, but it also meant she would be a tough nut to crack. And like I had predicted, she was. Instead of blushing and smiling like other women, she locked her eyes with mine, faked a smile, and continued eating her food. That was my first time being ignored like that by a woman, and it was embarrassing because everyone's eye was on us. Still, overall, I found her attitude very charming and different from the rest of the women I had met. I kept talking to her without getting a response, and finally, after I tried so much, she smiled. When she smiled genuinely that time, I knew I had broken through her high walls, and with a snap of a finger, we were talking and laughing together. The conversation we had felt like we had known each other for a long time flowed freely and naturally. Despite being complete strangers, we chatted like best friends who had not seen each other in a while, and at the end of my 30-minute break, we exchanged contacts and Facebook handles. There was something I was looking out for, and when I saw that, I asked her out. I was convinced we were a perfect fit, and I didn't want to make the same mistake I made with my ex-girlfriends. Of course, she said yes, and we became inseparable. We even wore matching outfits occasionally because she thought it was sweet. We dated for 9 months before we married, and though my friends thought I was moving too fast, I didn't think there was a better time to officially make her mine. About 2 weeks before our wedding, I leased a bigger apartment, and we moved in when we returned from our honeymoon. The first year of our marriage was splendid. I had never been deeply in love like I was with my wife, so I did anything I could to make her smile every day. Before we got married, I noticed that my wife was fond of my stepbrother, and she often talked about him when we returned from our family hangout. My stepbrother was a gym instructor, and as a result of that, he was heavily built. He was also handsome, and the kind of guy ladies love to be around. In the past, I had female friends who abandoned me the moment they met my stepbrother, and this mostly had to do with his looks. Since my wife had 3 older brothers and was used to being around guys, I believed she also saw him as her brother. I never suspected that her talking about his looks, and how well built he looked, was her subtly telling me that she was into him. I was even glad that she had a way of always bringing him into her conversations, as well as her brothers. This was because I wanted our families to be one big happy family, and I didn't want her shutting out my family members, including my stepbrother. I had been with him since I was 13 and he was 17, and I didn't want anyone to come between the bond we shared. On my 28th birthday, my wife decided to throw a surprise birthday party for me at home, and she tricked me into coming home early from work that day. I had to take the family emergency excuse to leave work early, only to go home to a packed house. My parents, stepbrother, and some of my friends were there, and my wife's parents and her older brother were there too. The surprise worked, and I was so happy to see everyone at my house that it was a small party with a lot to eat and drink. By this time, our marriage was already 1 year old, and we didn't have any children yet. After eating and drinking, everyone decided to hang around, since they were mostly family members and close friends. Also, it was pouring heavily outside, and no one had the excuse of going to work the next day since it was a Saturday. Everyone in the room was an adult, and in no time, we were arguing about politics and our economic crisis. The conversation grew intense as we all tried to outtalk one another, and that was when I noticed my wife was not with us. I didn't even notice when she left because she was sitting behind me, so I asked around for her. Everyone said they had not seen her until her mom casually said she had seen her walk down the corridor with my stepbrother. At first, I didn't want to go and look for them, but after some minutes, and I didn't see them or hear their voices, I excused myself. Walking down the corridor, I paid attention in case I heard voices, but I didn't hear a sound. When I didn't hear a sound, I felt something was wrong, but I couldn't tell what it was. As I approached our room, I began to hear soft muffled moans, and my heart nearly dropped in my stomach. I walked closer to our room, pressed my ear against the door, and could not believe what I heard. I was devastated and heartbroken, but I had to keep myself together. A part of me wanted to go in there and give them the beatings of their lives, but I knew it would only complicate things. So, I slowly pushed the door open, and luckily, they didn't hear a creak because they were so busy. I turned on my phone video recorder, recorded them, and quietly returned to the living room. About 15 minutes later, my stepbrother returned first, and some minutes later, she came in. She changed her clothes and took her bath, so no one would suspect anything. When we were complete, I asked if everyone wanted to see a movie, and they all agreed. Then I told my wife to go and make popcorn for everyone. While she was making the popcorn, I transferred the video I had recorded to my flash drive, so I could plug it into my large screen television. We were settled as soon as the popcorn was shared with everyone. I played the video, and though they did not understand at first, their mouths eventually fell when they watched the video. My wife and stepbrother were the most surprised ones, and they could not say anything or defend themselves. They sat there speechless. Our parents were shocked and disappointed, and none of them could say anything. They were all ashamed and expected me to react in a certain way, but I didn't. Immediately after the video ended, I asked my wife and stepbrother if they liked the movie, but they couldn't maintain eye contact. Funnily enough, it stopped pouring at the same time, but no one made an attempt to leave. When my wife could not bear the silence anymore, she started crying and begging. Her mom was so angry that she yelled at her, but she didn't stop. I went into our room and packed her things so she could leave with her parents, and eventually she did. No one dared beg on her behalf, not even her parents. My stepbrother left before my parents, but what he had done caused a rift between us. Everyone left that day with their heads buried in shame, especially my wife, and there's no need to ask if I divorced her because I did. It was even worse because I never spoke to her again. I didn't only cut ties with her, I did with my stepbrother too, and things never remained the same in my family. It's been 2 years now, and I'm finally able to tell this story because I have been able to let go. Though it hurt a lot, and I still don't think she deserved forgiveness, I had to do it for myself. I met another woman, and we're taking things one step at a time. OP, why would you keep hurting for a woman who cheated on you with your stepbrother, not minding that the whole family was in your house? That's pure evil and disrespect. Both of them were toxic, and you did the right thing by cutting ties with them. That was the height of betrayal, and none of them deserves to be in your life. I do not think she would have only cheated on you with your stepbrother. Maybe she would have done the same with other attractive men, so consider this good riddance of taking out the trash. I hope you are able to heal from this. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me.